Welcome, David.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks for taking the time to do this.
My pleasure.
David Allwright is the head of the School of Business at Bow Valley College. Is that correct?
Sure. I'm technically known as the Dean of Business and Technology. There are two schools. One is the Chiu School of Business, and the other is the School of Creative Technologies.
Awesome. That's great. And when did those get started?
The Chiu School of Business would be in existence now for about 7 years. School of Creative Technologies created about 3 years ago. And just this past spring, they both ended up under one dean, under myself.
And what sort of programs are you guys known for, especially?
Well, primarily in the business school, which is the larger of the two units. We do a lot of 1 and 2 year programming. We do a lot of university transfer. We have programming across most of the basic traditional business school disciplines, so accounting and human resources and marketing and supply chain, insurance, all the traditional business school programming. And we do programming also in health administration and other administrative type programs, either 1 or 2 year credentials.
Okay, so since it's a college, I'm guessing it's a little bit more hands-on and applicable stuff and a little bit less on the theory side. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it depends on the programming that you're looking at. If you're looking at the shorter term programming, then it's very definitely focused on graduate employment levels. So we look at making sure the students are prepared for the workplace. That's very applied. It's very focused on getting students into the workplace in a timely manner. Once you start getting into longer term programs like you would at any post-secondary, it becomes a more mix of applied, very hard-based skills, as well as some things that are a little bit more theoretical. So in our 2 year business diploma, you'll take things like economics and statistics, but you'll also then take things like accounting and finance that are a bit more hands-on and more applied.
That sounds great. It seems like a lot of the university degrees now, you spend a lot of time learning just for the sake of learning and not learning actual useful skills in the field that you're trying to get into, right? You're getting a lot of credits that aren't relevant, it seems. What are your thoughts on that?
I would dispute that a bit. The purpose of higher level degrees is to go beyond mere job placement. So yes, colleges are focused on the graduate outcomes in terms of job placement and opportunities. Most skill level type programs, you don't need 4 years. If you want to become a focused on a particular discipline like accounting, you could get everything you need in a 2 year program. It might take you longer if you want to become a brain surgeon. But again, that's very focused on a particular skill set. What universities have historically or more traditionally focused on is providing a broader based education. So yes, if you go and take a Bachelor of Commerce at the U of C, yes, you will be taking a mix of humanity courses and psychology and a mix of courses that you want to do that aren't necessarily business courses, but then you'll also be taking accounting and finance and stats and economics.
Mm-hmm. Do you think those additional courses that aren't necessarily relevant to your profession, do you think, like especially for undergrads, like if you're going to be a teacher or something, you can kind of do an undergrad in relatively whatever, right? Do you think that's a valuable use of time and resources, or what are your thoughts on that since you've been so involved in multiple sides of things?
Well, I've watched the debate and been part of the debate for a long time now, and what goes around comes around. Years ago, back even in the 60s, a university education was considered to be largely a liberal arts endeavor, and that we were basically training young people to think theoretically and to think abstractly and to think for themselves. And then pressures from outside stakeholders, parents who want their children to get jobs, and employers wanting more hard skills, started to focus our attention on a real skills-based approach. And that's why colleges have thrived, and that's the niche that we've been able to exploit, and we've grown well. The business school in Calgary, the Chiu School of Business, has quadrupled in size. But also what I find now when I talk to employers is, guess what? They want to go back to, they need students who can think for themselves, who have the soft skills, who are willing to go into a very ambiguous situation and figure things out for themselves. Well, if you're equipping students with a very narrow skill set, that might be more difficult for somebody to be able to think abstractly and think outside the box. And therefore, there are a lot of employers out there who will happily hire somebody who has a more generalized Bachelor of Arts degree, if it allows those students to think a bit more creatively and a bit more outside of the box. So it goes around, it comes around. You go too far in one direction and employers start pushing back saying, well, we need more of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, critical thinking skills are a very difficult thing to train. I know, like, when you're hiring for them, technical skills can be taught, but critical thinking can't always be taught, or common sense.
Oddly enough, the easy stuff to teach are the hard skills, and the hard stuff to teach are the soft skills. And you can't really teach them. They can be learned and they can be experienced, and you can put students in the right situations where they can experience those things for themselves. But most students that show up on our doorstep have had 18 to 20 years of their parents trying to get them to think for themselves and to show up in time and do all and be a team player and all of that. And their parents haven't had much success. So what do you think we're going to be able to do in a year or two? So students, it's a matter of maturity. It's a matter of experiencing those situations where you do have to, and if you're going to survive and function well, you're working as a team. Yeah. And you have to figure out solutions on your own. And again, that can't necessarily be taught. You can equip students with some skills that will get them partway there. A lot of other things go into that experience.
Having a school of business is really interesting to me. I know kind of typically entrepreneurs have a different thought process and different mindset from kind of non-entrepreneurs, people that are typically comfortable being employees. How do you accommodate that mindset in a school system? Because I know a lot of entrepreneurs that I know, they never did well in grade school, but grade school definitely is not catered towards entrepreneurship in any way. It's kind of the opposite. So in a school of business, how do you guys facilitate that mindset?
Well, different business schools are going to have different approaches to that. I mean, some business schools will promote a Dragon's Den type of approach where you come up with an idea and you pitch it and let's see who wins. And it makes for great television, but doesn't necessarily make for a great educational experience. What we've done in the Chiu School of Business, you'll notice there is no program called entrepreneurship. And what I've discovered over the years is that entrepreneurs generally don't do well in a traditional academic environment. If somebody's got a desire to become an entrepreneur, they're not going to apply for a program in February that starts in September that might take them 2 to 4 years to complete. That's not how anybody that has an entrepreneurial bent is going to think. That's not how it works. And generally, if you're thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, you're looking at fulfilling some sort of skills deficit. You're missing one thing. You got a great idea. You might be naturally good at marketing, but you need some help with the accounting or financing, or some sort of or further development of the project of your product or your service. So trying to get an entrepreneurial student to finish up even a 1-year program, it's really hard, and they're generally not going to be successful. In fact, programs that I've been involved with in the past, the lowest graduation rates of any program tended to be the entrepreneurship programs, because either they got what they wanted and then left prematurely and to run off to start their business, or they just didn't see it as what they needed. So we've taken a very different approach. We've taken everything that you would want to do or that we think you would need to learn in an entrepreneurship program, but rather than trying to convince people to sign up for that, we hold a contest that we call Venture Quest, where we will give you various incentives, including money, to take. All you need to do to get into it is just an idea. That's it. Nothing more, no prototypes, no business plan, nothing. Just an idea. And then we'll work with you through various stages of developing that idea, testing it out, signing up friends and relatives, and stress testing the idea. And if you make it through certain milestones, we'll pay you. You'll receive a monetary reward for getting through to the touch points until finally you're at the end in a room full of people pitching that idea, and you're pitching it to get 10 grand.
Wow, that's cool.
By that time you've gotten there, we've given you all those things that we would have taught you in an entrepreneurship program. We would have taught you how to test that idea. We would have taught you how to set up a website. We'll have taught you how to qualify consumers and purchasers. We will have given you an opportunity to talk to various experts in accounting and law and marketing to give you some feedback on how that thing's going to work.
Wow.
So by the time because we want you to actually move on to start that business. Mm-hmm. But for every 100 entrepreneurs with an idea, only 3 are going to make it through. And they will have learned something along the way that, okay, maybe this idea isn't so great. And, guess what? I'm not the first person who's thought of that idea. And here's why it doesn't work. So you have to go back.
I imagine it gives them a lot better platform than if they just borrowed a bunch of money from their family and had no knowledge and went out and started, hey?
And blew a pile of money.
Yeah.
And most young entrepreneurs are going to do that. Now, the failure rate for a first-time entrepreneur when you're under the age of 24 is pretty dismal. But a second time around, the success rate goes way up. So what we're trying to do, and we always say is, fail early, fail fast, fail often. Not necessarily the often part, but fail early and fail fast.
Yeah.
Figure out very quickly whether or not this idea is going to go somewhere, and then ditch it if it isn't, and move on to the next one, without hopefully losing too much money.
Yeah. So how long does that process take?
Well, the Venture Quest competition that we runs about 4 months, 5 months. We start recruiting students in the fall, and then it culminates in February. But for a typical entrepreneur, getting that first idea into some sort of actual product, service, a business idea that's somehow is tangible in a way that you might be able to approach investors, that's the hardest part, because a lot of people will have an idea and that's kind of where it dies. Mm-hmm. Because you don't know how to do the next thing, and you're not going to sign up for a program that, a 2-year diploma or a 4-year degree. You're not generally going to sign up for something like that because of that one idea you had that has a 99% chance of probably failing anyway.
Right.
But you have to find out what the next steps are. And the only way to really find that out is to experience it, to go and talk to people about the idea and to try to sign up users for your product, to get to the point where you realize, what the limitations are. And then you can maybe move on to the next one or tweak it radically, and it'll give you an idea for something else.
So do you find that a lot of people that go through that program end up going to get a diploma or something like that afterwards in the school?
Well, a lot of our students that we get are already in some sort of program.
Okay.
Probably half the students that are in our Venture Quest program aren't even business students.
Oh, okay.
They're in other parts of the college doing other things, but they've got an idea for something they think might work. Mm-hmm. In fact, I'd say the majority of students that actually ended up winning the competition and getting the funding and starting the business were not business students.
Interesting.
Because at Bow Valley we have a lot of students who come to us from other countries. They already have other credentials, baccalaureates, masters. They might have run a business back in where they came from, their former country. They come from a culture where you start your own business because that's what you do to earn a living. You start a business. So they have the idea of one. They know what they want to do, but they've never done business in Canada. They don't understand the Canadian cultural landscape when it comes to business. And so what we're helping those students do is translate an idea that you have that would have worked in your home country into something that's feasible in Canada.
Amazing. That seems
So
very
they do
helpful.
well.
Do you find that a lot of immigrants have a better work ethic than a lot of people that grow up here?
People like to say that. I don't know that it's a work ethic per se. I think that a lot of new Canadians are certainly motivated because they don't have a support system in place. So they're much they've got a lot less patience for sort of waiting to, well, I'm going to go to university for 4 years and then I'll probably get a job with a nice big company and things will be nice that way. I don't know. I wouldn't say that Canadian students are have less of a work ethic. They just have a different approach to it and a different need for what they want to do. They can take a bit more of a longer term approach to it. I'm going to start a career. I'm going to become a lawyer and start a career, and in 30 years, 40 years, I'll retire. If you're a new Canadian, you don't have that kind of a timeline. You've got a family to feed right now. They tend to be fairly mature. They tend to be fairly well educated, so they're in a bit more of a hurry. So therefore, they're willing to put the time and the effort into achieving some of their goals in a much shorter time span because they don't have the luxury of time.
It seems like some cultures too, like East Indian and Asian cultures, the parents have high expectations of their children and really want them to make the most of the opportunities too, which I feel like really pushes them to succeed and to strive.
That's why I think a lot of parents have a lot of expectations, and my mother certainly did.
Yeah.
But I think put yourself in the place of a 30-something recent immigrant who has a baccalaureate. Are you willing to go back to sort of your 18-year-old self and do all that over again? Or are you going to be much more motivated? I mean, I see a lot of mature students, Canadian or otherwise, who have a very different approach to studying. I went back to university when I was in my 30s, and I wasn't about to pull an all-nighter in the bar.
Yeah.
And I had a test the next day, and I was much more focused on getting through those courses and getting a grade. When I was 18, that would never have happened.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
there's a maturity, there's a bit of maturity going on there as well. An 18-year-old doesn't have the intellectual maturity that a 22-year-old has.
Yeah, for sure.
And I see it every day. The difference between an 18 and a 22-year-old is really like night and day. Well, extrapolate that out to a 32-year-old, and you're going to start seeing that their attention to what they're trying to get through their post-secondary and get an education, they've come to the realization that whatever they've done in the past isn't working for them. And so if they want to turn their life around and do something different, education is going to be it, and I'm not going to waste any more time.
Yeah, I think at that age, people tend to take life a little bit more seriously, especially if they have like a family or something like that they need to support, then it matters a lot.
Yeah, that motivation is much more pronounced. And so, whether or not you're a traditional Canadian or a new immigrant, when you're in your early 30s and you've got families and you've been through a bunch of things in the past and you've got life experiences, education is going to take on a whole different meaning to how it's going to impact your life.
So where did you grow up in Calgary?
No, I grew up in Manitoba, moved to the territories when I was still in school.
Okay.
Finished high school in Yellowknife and went off to seek fame and fortune with the Hudson's Bay Company.
So did you move up there with your parents to Yellowknife?
Yeah.
What were they doing up there?
They were working for the government. So
Okay.
my father worked for the federal government. My mother ended up working for the territorial government.
Awesome. And then so you graduated high school and then went to work for the Hudson's Bay Company.
Correct.
What was that like?
It was a whole heck of a lot of fun. As an 18-year-old, I could highly recommend it in terms of the life experiences that it gives you. Had a great time. I spent 5 years with the Bay, traveling around the territories, the Arctic, at probably a dozen different postings in that time. Learned a lot about independence because if you're posted to a Clavic, your boss is 2,000 miles away, and you got no one to call if something goes wrong and something blows up or somebody dies. You're it. And, when you're 19, 20 years old, that's a huge amount of responsibility that you have to make your way through and make decisions. And you've got people that you have to, that you're responsible for.
Yeah, it sounds like it would be difficult as a 18 or 19-year-old.
Yeah, I find it hard to imagine people today doing that, but then this was the 70s, so
yeah,
just simply that's what you did. You left home when you finished high school and you went off to make your fortune. It wasn't until later I decided to come back to university.
So what did you do after the Hudson's Bay when you were finished with that?
Moved to Red Deer, where my parents had moved to. My father was sick, and so
okay.
I moved there to help my mother, and worked in a few jobs there. So I was in banking for a while, owned my own restaurant for a short period of time, and was in the hotel business for a while until I decided that I'd run out of excuses to not go to university.
Tell us a little bit about the restaurant. That sounds interesting.
Oh, that was something that my wife and I decided at the time that would be a good idea. Maybe not so much in retrospect, but we decided, at the time that it's either we're going to start our own business and we're going to do this now, or it's not going to happen later in life. So, didn't work out the way we wanted, but it was also a good life lesson as well.
Yeah, for sure. How long did you have it for?
We had that for about 2 years.
Okay. What kind of restaurant?
It was a small family restaurant.
Okay.
So pretty nondescript in the end.
Interesting. And then you decided to go back to school.
Mm-hmm.
So did you go to school in Calgary then at that point?
Did 2 years at Red Deer College and then transferred to the U of C to finish up their Bachelor of Commerce.
Okay. And then when did you go to the Hosking School of Business?
Well, that was in Haskayne. It wasn't called
okay.
Haskayne at the time. It was just simply called the School of Management or Faculty of Management.
Okay.
Finished up my BCom then and had a choice between going to work for Syncrude in Fort McMurray or doing a master's program. And decided, because I had a personal commitment in Calgary, to stay in Calgary and pursue a master's, and ended up in the PhD program there.
That's awesome.
Never left post-secondary at that point.
Did you complete your PhD then?
Mm-hmm.
There?
Yep.
What was your goal with that? What was your end?
Well, I realized before I'd even finished it, well before I finished it, that I wanted to teach. And I didn't have a particular desire to stay in the research side of a research university. I wanted to teach.
Mm-hmm.
And U of C hired me to start teaching at the time accounting courses, which I find interesting because I did a BCom in accounting, but swore I was never going to become an accountant, although I did accounting in my past life. But ended up doing some work in strategic management, which is where I ended up doing my PhD in.
Okay.
And from there, taught more for the U of C, and then Mount Royal College called and offered me a tenure track position. Became a department chair and the associate dean of the business school, and then it became Mount Royal University, and spent a few years doing that transition from a college to a university, developing research agenda, that sort of thing. And then Bow Valley came calling with an offer I couldn't refuse.
That's awesome. So what kind of skills did they teach you in the PhD? What kind of things did you learn? I feel like that'd be fascinating.
Skills would be a bit of a stretch, although research skills and writing, and thinking, if you call those skills in a very applied setting, you certainly learn how to write better. Really what a PhD does is that it hones your intellect in terms of being able to defend an argument, defend a position, understand how it is we know what we know, and of course a PhD is all about coming up with a new knowledge and new understanding of what we see going on around us.
Mm-hmm.
So my research was in capabilities and how they're developed and possessed by organizations.
Interesting.
And you don't want, and one question that you should never ask a PhD student is to ask them about the research unless you really, really want to hear the answer.
What was did you have to do like a big thesis or something like that?
So the Hudson School of Business back then, and to a certain extent still now, you complete a bunch of courses. I think it was a dozen at the time, although it's less now. And then you do a research proposal, you write what's known as a candidacy exam, and then you're free to run off and work on your dissertation. And that could take a couple of years to do. You defend your dissertation, and then you're anointed with your PhD.
What do you think is the solution in Alberta for the energy stuff that's going on?
Well,
to ask a difficult
if I knew, if I knew, I think Premier Kenney would probably be giving me a call right about now. Okay. The hard answer to that, and the one that a lot of people probably don't want to hear, is that in the long term, oil and gas is, if you look at the trajectory of all industries, oil and gas is in deep trouble long term. It won't take much more in the way of technological development for oil to be largely displaced as an energy source. There are people right now spending billions of dollars trying to put oil and gas out of business, not because they have a problem with climate change, it's because they see a business opportunity. Mm-hmm. And those people are going to succeed because sooner or later somebody's going to find, just as coal displaced, cars displaced horse-drawn wagons, somebody's going to come along with just the right combination of technology and the application of that technology that's going to put oil and gas into kind of the death spiral that coal is in. Mm-hmm. People seem to think we're going to be able to hang on to coal in Alberta. No, we're not. That dream died years ago.
Do you think we'll see a bit of a comeback for oil and gas in Calgary?
You're going to see period mini booms and mini busts going forward. I think that what you're seeing now is going to be something that we're going to be with for a long time. But in 10 years' time, the competition for the competition from other sources of energy is going to be a lot more acute. Mm-hmm. Solar, wind, hydro, even nuclear is going to be making it much more difficult for oil and gas to sustain itself as the big-shouldered industry that it has been up to now. It's still going to be around, but it's going to be just another way. I mean, the analogy I use is when VHS tapes came out, people were talking about the death of TV and the death of movie theaters. No, it's not. And no, it wasn't. It just becomes another player providing a range of entertainment options. Well, oil and gas is just simply going to be another player providing a range of energy options for the consumer. There are people spending billions of dollars to find ways of making electric cars. And the only thing that's stopping electric cars from completely displacing the internal combustion engine is the storage capacity of batteries. And there are people spending, very smart people spending a lot of money to figure out how to make those things better in terms of storage capacity. And they'll succeed. Mm-hmm. It's just the limitations of the technology now that still sees oil and gas as being the predominant energy source. But 20 years' time, I'm not buying long into oil and gas.
Yeah. The crazy breakthroughs and things Elon Musk has done with Tesla in the last few years has been incredible.
Yeah. I mean, people can talk about his pickup truck as being a bit of a joke, and yes, it is, but give him 5 years.
Yeah.
And I might regret buying my pickup truck today.
Yeah. I was talking to another guy, I think it was Robert Price. Art Price was his dad, the former CEO of Husky. Mm-hmm. And we were talking, and it would take a pretty big tech startup in Calgary to really make up for some of the lost GDP from oil. Yeah. Like, it is such a huge part of the economy? Like, I know like a lot of people are talking about how Calgary's getting more and more tech heavy, but it seems like it's a really, really small percent of the economy here.
It's not going to have the same kind of numbers that oil and gas had. So I think what we have to come to the realization within Calgary and Alberta in general is that those years are past us. And even if oil goes back up to $100 a barrel, you're not going to see the kind of employment boom that we've seen in the past. Oil and companies are too smart for that now. They've spent the last 5 years learning how to make money at $35 and $55 a barrel. They're not going to do anything stupid if it suddenly goes up to 100. They're just simply going to be pocketing that cash and paying out dividends. But they're not going to go whole hog into the rather profligate ways of the past.
Yeah, that makes sense. What do you see is the future for economy in Calgary? What areas do you think will be impactful?
Well, I think services to not only oil and gas, but to technology and even some manufacturing now. So I think that there's an opportunity. You know, I'm old enough to remember Peter Lougheed back in the 60s and early 70s talking about having to diversify the economy, and everybody paid lip service to it, but then they got bought off with oil and gas money. Now they're not going to be bought off. So there are people nowadays that are really seriously focused on finding ways of diversifying the economy. But yeah, it's going to take 10 to 15 years to, and I've known for a decade now that if oil and gas collapses, all of those nice shiny buildings downtown are just simply going to be empty monuments to a failed industry. And they're not exactly festooned with banners talking about the death of oil and gas, but they're not going to be filled with oil and gas workers going forward.
I think commercial downtown's 20% empty?
Or 30. It's not a pretty number.
No.
And I don't know how the companies that own those buildings are keeping it together.
So do you think that might get worse?
I think oil and gas companies are actively trying to find a way to reduce their human resource footprint. I think that this is the time that oil and gas are working very hard to find a way to change their system so that they can rely less on people sitting at their desks pushing paper and more on AI systems that are going to allow them to automate a lot of what they do. When you look at the inner workings of an oil and gas company and the internal reporting and control systems, they've been dragged kicking and screaming out of the 60s. Those parts of the business were never the core competencies of oil and gas. Oil and gas is all about finding oil and finding ways of getting it out of the ground, so engineers and geologists. But all the other people in the background, the HR people, the marketing, the accountants, finance people, nobody saw spending money in those functions as providing any sort of competitive advantage. If you're an oil and gas company, finding a better way to do your internal command and control structure is not going to give you a competitive advantage in the old oil and gas. But in the new oil and gas, that's one of the few places left that you can actually squeeze out the last few bucks out of an industry with hideously narrow margins. So those are where, like in the old days, Walmart taught everybody that supply chain was the way to build up an efficient and profitable and competitive retail company. All the old companies were focused on how do you merchandise well, how do you displays and stuff like that. And Walmart figured, well, how the hell do you get stuff onto the shelves better, faster, and cheaper than anyone else can do it? And so they completely rewrote the book on how to be a retailer. Well, oil and gas are now starting to realize, how do you become a more efficient energy producer? Well, start looking at all of those backroom functions that were rooted firmly in the 70s and 80s that never, oil and gas companies are very technologically savvy and found more and better and innovative ways of getting oil out of the ground, but they didn't work on their own their own internal command and control systems. And so that's what they've had to spend the last 5 years working on. And so they're not going to go back to the way they were.
I feel like our government, too, hasn't done a good job in facilitating them to grow and hire more people and provide jobs and making it economically feasible.
Well, I don't know that you can do much for an industry that is that big. The governments can't do that sort of thing. They don't have a magic wand to wave and to suddenly transform, mega industries like oil and gas. They have to do it themselves, and the only way they can do it themselves is through competitive pressure. They're the ones with the money. They're the ones with the technical expertise, and they're the ones that know how their business is being run and how it maybe ought to be run. What governments need to do is, in this case, they need to find a way of stimulating other parts of the economy to be able to take the place. I think it's somewhat unfortunate that the current government is still still focused on oil and gas, which is great because it is a big part of the Alberta economy. But you've really got to start investing. Taking Peter Lougheed's desire to diversify the economy, you've got to start taking that seriously.
Yeah, that's a challenging one with how much of the GDP oil accounts for in Alberta.
And that's the problem. I know I see a lot of politicians talking about Alberta doesn't have a revenue problem, has an expense problem. No, Alberta has a revenue problem, and the revenue problem is that it's highly cyclical, it's highly addictive. When times are good, I don't know a politician on this planet that doesn't want to spend that money. And as every business person knows, when you're ramping up and expanding, that's expensive, and when you're having to contract, that's also expensive. And that's all we do in Alberta is we ramp up as quickly as we can when there's lots of oil and gas money, and then when it crashes, we slash and burn to try to scale back. Other provinces don't do that because they have a much more stable revenue stream. But we're still too dependent on the oil and gas stream, which are far too volatile. No business person on this planet wants to run a business where your revenue stream is that volatile. That's why cell phone companies want you to sign up for long-term plans as opposed to just paying by the minute.
Yeah.
They give you incentives that way they can plan out their expenses. So it's not the expenses that the problem, it's the expenses that are driven by revenue. Because when you have revenue, you spend the money.
Do you think the current cuts with the provincial government are going to affect you and the college?
Well, they'll affect all post-secondary, and they'll affect healthcare and education and services and things like that. That's just what happens. But that's what happens when you have a boom and a bust. A few years of a bust and everything grows, and a few years of a boom and everything grows, and a few years of bust, everything collapses. But it's expensive to do both things. It's expensive to ramp up quickly, and it's expensive to ramp down quickly.
Do you think the current government is making the right choice? I know a lot of people are upset, but I don't think a lot of people realize that we're in that bust either.
Well, if you look at Alberta compared to other provinces, we're still Manitoba on a good day. And 7% unemployment. Yes, if you're in Alberta, that seems like we're in the midst of the 1930s depression. But really, that's just other provinces on a typical day. What I think the government are trying to do is trying to balance off the desire to provide employment while at the same time balance an economy. And how do you stimulate economy when you lay off 6,000 people? That's not stimulating the economy. So I think that they've got some hard decisions, and they're going to make those hard decisions, and I hope for their sake it works out.
So a couple quick questions here before we wrap up. What mistakes do you see entrepreneurs making early on? Because you've had a ton of experience now. I'm sure there's a lot of trends you see and a lot of the same mistakes being repeated.
A lot of entrepreneurs get too wrapped up in the product that they have. Successful companies are well-run companies. They work on building, a successful company. A good company is going to come up with good products because it's well-run, and the ownership of the company are focused on getting the right people in place. Entrepreneurs get fixated on generally you come up with a product that's in an area of your own expertise and interest, which means you get blinded by that. You come up with a great technological, what you think is a neat technological innovation, or you come up with a neat product idea that you think, oh yeah, boy, if I were somebody, I'd want that. I'd want to buy that. But that tends not to be true.
Mm-hmm.
So where new entrepreneurs tend to lose it is they don't get a good gut check. They don't stress their idea so that they find out whether or not it really is going to fly.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not they really do have the connections to get enough people to buy their product in a sufficiently fast, quickly enough to get that company off the ground. Most people overestimate the appeal of their product.
Yeah, we had a client a while back that we helped with some video stuff, and they had a product that they put a ton of money into molds, and they put a ton of money into a website, and just kept dumping money into it, ended up remortgaging their house, ended up losing their house over it. They never had several people interested at any time in the product. They never asked anybody in advance if they'd buy it. Mm-hmm. And it was, in my opinion, way overpriced, but they're like, oh no, we need to make it in Canada to support Canada, which I agree with, but if your product's going to be 4 times the price of the competitors, it might not be feasible. Yeah. So that was really sad. I think, like you said, making sure the product's valuable is good.
I think what a lot of people forget is that businesses aren't in business to make money. Businesses are in business because they make money. And when, the only reason somebody's going to buy your product as opposed to do it for themselves or build it for themselves is if you can make that product for them better, faster, cheaper than they can do for themselves. And if you can't do it better, faster, and cheaper than what they can do for themselves, then they're going to do it themselves. And so therefore businesses stay in business because they can do it better, faster, cheaper than their competitors, and people are willing to buy it from them. Businesses aren't a business to make money. They're in business because they make money. Otherwise, people just find another way to get that product or service.
Yeah, that's very good advice.
Right? I mean, I used to ask my student, how many students in this room have baked a cake from scratch? And a lot of people put up their hand. And I said, really? So you grew your own wheat. You dug ore out of the ground to build your own oven. You grew your own chickens and harvested your own eggs and built your own windmill to grind your flour, to grind the grain into flour. You did all that. Well, no, nobody can do that. If you ask somebody, can you build a car from scratch? No, they can assemble a car from parts. Mm-hmm. And people forget that the reason why businesses exist is because those organizations can do those things for you that you can't do for yourself. Otherwise, there's no need for those organizations. Mm-hmm. The reason why they sustain themselves is because they can do those things for you and you're willing to pay them.
Mm-hmm. What advice do you have for new entrepreneurs and business owners finding mentorship or guidance or support?
Find out people. Don't just talk to people in your own business, because if you're going to do something interesting and innovative, don't talk to people that have been doing it the same way 100 years. Yes, find out how that whole business currently works if you're going to try to get into that industry, but then talk to other people. Talk to the people who are coming at it from left field. Talk to people who actually have experience with starting up businesses as opposed to somebody who's been in a business for a long time. I've often said that the definition of an expert is somebody who's forgotten all the rules. Well, that's great. It means they don't know all the rules that you need to know. They've internalized it, they've memorized it. Somebody who's just recently started their own business and failed is going to give you much better advice than somebody who started one 30 years ago and has been successful ever since. Mm-hmm. You'll get some advice on how to run your company once it's up and running from somebody who's been doing it for 30 years, but you really want to talk to somebody, if you're starting a business, who just started and failed one, who just started and succeeded in getting one off the ground, because their experience is going to be much more relevant to you.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Yes, if I want advice on how to run a multi-million-dollar company, I'll go talk to somebody who runs a multi-million-dollar company. But as a new entrepreneur, I'm not going to be running a multi-million-dollar company.
So what are your goals, both personally and for the school in the next 5 to 10 years?
This is me simply predicting the future. So the model of post-secondary, the business model that post-secondary institutions, colleges and universities or throughout the world have operated under has been a very robust business model for the past 500 years. We've done the same thing for 500 years, and it's been a great business model. And we have weathered every sort of technological onslaught and economic onslaught and political onslaught you can imagine, and we're still here doing it this way. What you're going to start seeing, though, is that the bubble that we've lived in, the ivory tower that we lived in, is going to come crashing down sometime in the next 5 to 10 years. Because artificial intelligence is going to make it possible for a student to interact with a, quote, instructor, hand quotes here, an instructor who will be an artificial intelligent agent. That so-called instructor will be able to tailor every exam, every lecture, every deliverable to your own speed, pace. You're having a bad day today, so they'll slow it down. Maybe you got a cold. They can provide advice on what courses to take. They can build your schedule for you, and you never actually have to technically sit in it's not online per se, but you're interacting with, the technology isn't there yet. Technology is always 5 years behind the promise, or the promise is always 5 years behind the technology. But artificial intelligence is going to get to the point where you can be talking to somebody and not realize that you're not talking to an actual human being. And you can be in a virtual environment, a VR environment, where it looks like you're in a classroom with a bunch of other students, but you're not. And the interaction you're having with that so-called instructor is different than what those other students are experiencing. What instructors and professors at universities are going to be doing is they're going to be behind the scenes validating that AI, validating the competencies, validating the assessment devices, validating the material that you're going to be covering. But the actual flapping of the arms in front of a room full of students isn't going to be the future. I mean, post-secondary has done a very good job of expanding the where and the when of educational delivery. So the where, whether it's online or face-to-face in the classroom, and the when allows you to take courses, build them around your own schedule. But the how is a third dimension. A how is no longer somebody standing in front of a classroom and trying to tailor that educational experience one-on-one to you as the student. I mean, that's the ideal way, where you sit down and you have a one-on-one tutorial with every one of your instructors. But it's hideously expensive, and one instructor might be able to handle 30 students a semester, and that would be about it, not the 150 or 200 students they would typically interact with. Mm-hmm. 5 or 10 years' time, 10 almost for sure, that's what post-secondary is going to look like. 15 at the outset, but only because post-secondaries are slow to adapt to things like that. But that's what the future of post-secondary is going to look like. And there are people right now, like I said earlier, spending billions of dollars trying to figure out how to do that, and they're going to be successful.
Wow. Be interesting.
It'll be a different experience. Will it be better or worse? Who knows? Mm-hmm. Will it be different? Certainly. But even now, where we've come in the last 20 years in terms of how much stuff a student does online, even when they're in a face-to-face classroom, is miles ahead of where it was at the turn of the century.
Yeah, for sure.
So think about what that's going to look, extrapolate out from there, and think about what people are working on in terms of artificial intelligence and augmented reality and virtual reality. I mean, we're already now, even at Bow Valley College, building virtual classrooms for students, where they're going to be in a virtual classroom. These are more in terms of our nursing and our health administration, where you're not actually going to be standing next to a bed with a dummy mannequin there that you take the pulse of. Mm-hmm. You'll be doing that in a virtual environment, and you'll be doing that in the next year.
Wow, it's like the Matrix.
And because the technology allows us to do that.
Incredible. Yeah, I could see the benefits of that could be huge.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. And that's the low-hanging fruit. Imagine what we could be doing in 5 years' time.
Yeah. Yeah, the experiences you could give someone virtually that would be so expensive or difficult to make reality.
As an instructor, I wouldn't exist in enough dimensions to be able to give you the kind of one-on-one interaction at the time and the place of your choosing that you would want me to be there for you. I couldn't do it, but you could be taking a class anytime, day or night, interacting with your instructor anytime, day or night, geared towards your own personal circumstances. You could say, "Oh, pause for a second. I've got to go change the diapers," and the kids are yelling at each other. And
yeah, you see fitness and gaming going in that direction very quickly, so it totally makes sense that education would as well.
Sure. I mean, there's no shortage of video games now, computer games that allow you to interact with in a quasi-virtual environment with thousands of other people. And half of those people, you don't know whether or not they're actual, controlled by humans or a non-player character.
We have a client that sells a VR fire extinguisher training course, which is pretty interesting. They do pretty well. They sell it all over the world.
Yeah, you could do also. There's all sorts of programs like that, and that's very similar to what we're actually doing at Bow Valley in terms of some of the program that we'll be revamping in the next year or so, in terms of the ability for the students to interact with patients.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Is there anything else you'd like to add about the college?
Come to Bow Valley College if you're looking for a career tune-up and reskilling. As a 2-year institution, a 1-year institution, we've got plenty of opportunities for people to change careers midstream, upskill, reskill. That's what we're here for.
Thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan.
Our first sponsor is Symbol Syndication, which is a video production company that I started. We do video production and online marketing for businesses of all sizes, ranging from solopreneurs to Fortune 500 companies.
Our next sponsor is FLAGSHIP Business Brokers. FLAGSHIP Business Brokers provides entrepreneurs with support through the purchase, sale, or financing of a business. They have a proven track record of delivering fast, cost-efficient, and client-focused transactions.
Another sponsor of the Ambition Project is BusinessLink. BusinessLink is Alberta's entrepreneurial hub. They are a nonprofit organization that helps people navigate the steps towards starting their own businesses. Just because you're in business for yourself doesn't mean you're in business by yourself. BusinessLink's team of in-house startup experts are there to support you all along the way.